What's happening, big dogs? Welcome back to the channel. This is Bunkbed Breakdowns, BDGE's very own Dynasty show. My name is Noah. That is Mike, my co-host, who joins me every single Wednesday, even on the brand new channel where we will have brand new content coming out almost every single day. Mike, you worked a long, hard day today, which is why we're recording at 11 p.m. Eastern time. And it's probably going to be tomorrow by the time we're done with this. So if the energy isn't there from either side, I hope you guys understand that we're doing this very late, and Mike has been working very hard in his actual job recently. So, but we'll give you guys our best performance. It's a Q&A, and every week going forward, actually bi-weekly, Mike and I will be hopping on the BBB channel doing Q&As from our Discord. There's a channel, I believe it's called Triple B Q&A, and we'll just be picking questions at random, probably like a 10 to 20 minute video, just answering those every other week from those. I think it'll be on Tuesdays. We'll do either roster review or trade advice for you guys in the Discord channel. But we'll also have videos on Friday and Monday. You guys will see those when they come. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So when they come out, you'll see if they're good or if they're bad. And you can leave feedback on that. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here for the Q&A. We got about 12 questions queued up. I'm not so sure if we're going to get to them before we both fall asleep, but hopefully we knock them all out of the way. Mike, I just rambled for about 2 minutes. How you doing, man? I feel like you deserve to speak in this intro.
I'm fucking exhausted. Been working like basically 7:30 to 8 p.m. straight, so we're recording late. So Uncle Nick is asleep because he's old as fuck. So it's me and Noah running the show today. As it should be, man. This is our bunk bed breakdown. We've launched a new channel. We've launched a new pod. We're coming at you with a bunch of freaking content. We've uploaded a lot of the single player reviews that we did earlier in the year. I think they're still valuable to look back and go. Now you'll get to see the awesome call Noah made on CEH. We talk about a lot about the running backs, a lot about the wide receivers, a lot of the clickbait titles that Noah's been putting up. Maximum clickbait, maximum views, but still big facts only. So look, man, we're going to give you a lot of content. I'm excited. I still got enough energy to put out this nice episode here. So I want to pump out these Q&As, and we're gonna hit that intro.
All right, first question comes from It's Bunch. He asks, what was your best trade of all time and your worst? Mike, if you don't have an answer right now, I'll just kick it off. My worst trade of all time was prior to the season beginning. I moved Jimmy G, Terry McLaurin, and Tyler Boyd for Devontae Adams. That isn't like an awful trade, but if I knew what Terry McLaurin was going to be, I probably wouldn't have pulled the trigger on that.
Is that Superflex?
It was Superflex, yeah, but I hate Jimmy
wow.
Garoppolo either way. It was tough. And Mike, I'm not playing any one quarterback leagues. This isn't 1934.
Yeah, it's true.
On top of that, in a startup, I also traded Allen Robinson coming off of that bad year for Hollywood Brown, Jay Sternberger, and Chase Edmonds. So it goes without being said that was not one of my prettier deals. Mike, do you have any off the top of your head where you just got absolutely shafted?
Dude, if that's your worst trade, I'm about to put you away right here. So before the season started, I think this was like before like the Melvin Gordon holdout and all this stuff, and the people thought Austin Eckler was going to be good, but like still just a handcuff for the primary part of it.
I mean, Mike,
I traded Austin Eckler and like a 3rd round pick for Chris Herndon in and the reason why I did it is because it's a start 2 tight end league. Mm-hmm. So you have to start 2 every week, and it's a tight end premium. So it's a little bit unique scoring. And I was a big Chris Herndon believer based on what he did in his rookie year. But yeah, that was just a brutal trade. And I somehow still managed to win that league though. So
humble brag, love that.
I was flush with running back talent. Let's just say it that way. I had Saquon Barkley, I had Dalvin Cook, I had Nick Chubb. I was just flush with running back.
The craziest thing is you traded away your best one.
Yeah, exactly. I traded away my RB1, which was tilting, but managed to win. So hopefully I'm able to win a couple more times in that league, because that's like a rolling empire pot. That was my worst trade.
Do you have any best trades that made people look foolish?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have many trades that make people look foolish, because I don't like the way I approach trades. I try to make it like a fair trade for the most part in the time. So like I pay market price, and if it's a player I like, I pay above market price, because I'm betting on that player to like succeed in the future, right? So a couple examples would be, before the season started, I traded like Drew Lock plus Tyler Lockett plus a second for Lamar Jackson. And this was like before last season, right? So Lamar Jackson's ADP was around 5th round ADP. So I think I got a pretty decent deal on that in a super flex. But then it just turned out to be like an amazing deal because of what Lamar Jackson turned out to be, right? Another example would be I paid Chris Carson and Marlon Mack for DJ Moore and Matt Breida. So this was also before the season started. So at the time, that's an overpay, right? Because Chris Carson had the workhorse role locked up, like Marlon Mack had the role locked up, and this is a points per carry league as well. So running backs are really valuable. But for me, I was like, I'm all in on DJ Moore, and I will overpay out the ass for him if I have to.
Yeah, the only trade I ever made that I don't want to say made somebody look foolish because they still got a good asset out of it is when I had my ESPN insider, Cali Dog 304, whatever his name is, tell me that Andrew Luck's cap was all messed up. I traded Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett, and DK Metcalf for Baker Mayfield, which isn't awful. But then I flipped Baker Mayfield for Kyler, a second, 2/3, and a
Oh
fourth
yeah, I
after
remember
that.
that.
Yeah, I
That
think
was a
everybody
great.
does because that's all I talk about at this point. But after that terrible preseason game, I just threw out an offer. It happened to land in my favor, and I still think I have Kyler Murray in that league. I didn't win it all, which was very disappointing, but that was probably my best trade I ever made. I don't like Mike said, it's tough to go out there and just throw offers that heavily favor you because then people don't want to trade with you.
Unless you're Scott.
Scott, but yeah, if
Scott, the Godfather.
well, Scott is like so polite with it. He'll just like
I
come up
know.
to you and say,
He's the
hey,
best, man.
Ashton, I just sent you the best trade you've ever seen. It's basically a Christmas gift in the middle of January, or in the
Yeah,
middle of
Scott.
whatever month he sends it to you. And then all of a sudden you blink and he has Ezekiel Elliott and Lamar Jackson on his roster. And the only thing, Kobe
Scott's a
Brissett,
legend, man. Scott is the goat.
dude, he's
Gotta
like
give
the
it
Grinch. He just takes gifts.
to him.
He is something else, but I don't want to disparage him. We're going to move on to the next question. It is from our man or woman, I don't know, N Peretz 24. I hope I pronounced that right. He or she asks, is the alpha wide receiver a dying breed? I don't know how you interpret this, Mike, but I think a lot of people picture an alpha receiver as Calvin Johnson, somebody who's like 6'3 to 6'5, 225 pounds, around there, just runs a 4.3 like a Julio Jones. In that
Yeah.
sense, not that I think it's dying, but I think the NFL is changing more to the Deebo Samuel, the DJ Moore,
Yeah.
those type of guys that are a little bit smaller and thicker that can do more after the catch, not just at the catch point or prior to the catch. And I think in that sense, I guess the alpha wide receiver is dying. But then again, guys like that are going to see 120, 130, 140 targets a year. So I don't think wide receivers are dead. I don't think you should just pass on a guy like Michael Thomas or Tyreek Hill because you think the sense of the word alpha isn't there anymore. These guys are still going to be fed. There are other guys who don't fit this mold at all that are just big slot receivers or like medium-sized slot receivers like a Tyler Boyd who's going to see like 140 targets. So that's what I think of it. There's a question later on talking about like why we think wide receiver production fell off, but
I take it as differently. So I take it as like the target hog wide receiver. So the guys that get like 160, 170 targets a year. Is that a dying breed? And I mean, the data shows that it is. I think JJ Zachariason at Late Round QB on Twitter, in one of his podcasts, I don't remember what episode it was, but he like covered it in pretty good detail. And like you see that the targets are being dispersed throughout the NFL. Like why is wide receiver so deep, right? Wide receiver is so deep because the targets are being dispersed. So there's more wide receiver twos and there's more wide receiver twos and more wide receiver threes than like ever before. And that's why you can wait on wide receiver. The guys like Julio Jones, the guys like Megatron, they're just like very, very rare nowadays. And is that because we haven't had a generational type talent, regardless of what everyone keeps saying Jerry Jeudy is, come into the league? Probably. I mean, we haven't seen a Megatron. We haven't seen a Julio Jones. We haven't even seen an AJ Green in a long time. You know, those guys. We've seen a DK Metcalf. You know, we've seen guys like that, but those are still second round picks, right? We haven't seen that like elite top 10 round, like first round wide receiver. That's just
put
like
some
an
respect on Mike
absolute
Williams'
animal.
name. 6th overall pick.
Yeah. Have you seen his player profiler? Mike Williams is far from a beast. So I wouldn't call him that. But yeah, I mean, I think he's undervalued, but let's get to that later. But yeah, I think that the target hog wide receiver, the alpha wide receiver from a fantasy perspective, I think is a dying breed because the NFL is dispersing. Like you see it, like targets are being dispersed. Therefore, volume is being dispersed. And, you know, what correlates most with fantasy production is volume, right? So if volume is going away and being spread out more, that means we should also be spreading out our fantasy assets more. And that's why I advocate for trading back and I advocate for getting deeper rosters because, you know, there is more deeper plays. It's just like how the workhorse running back is a dying breed, right? We kind of see the exact same thing going on with wide receiver. But at the same time, it makes those wide receivers even more valuable, right? It makes the Devontae Adams, the Michael Thomases, like there's only like 3 or 4 of them now, right? You're not, so they do provide somewhat of an edge, but at the same time, it comes down to positional scarcity. So I do think it's a dying breed. Maybe next year in 2021, we get a couple new Megatrons and Julio Jones, but until we kind of see that, I think we're kind of going to be stuck in the zone where we have a super deep wide receiver class from like 15 to 30.
Yeah, and I think I need to kind of change my perspective on wide receivers. Like in AJ Brown, he's somebody that I listed as a sell high because of the lack of volume he sees in that offense.
Mm-hmm.
But you think about it, right? Even though it's a lack of volume, the way he's being used is one of like for a rookie, you don't see teams really cater their offense around a rookie. Obviously, Derrick Henry is like the main focal point of that offense, but the way he was being used fit his skill set perfectly. Same with Deebo Samuel. So I like what you said there, Mike, that like these guys aren't seeing 140 targets. There aren't as many big time alpha receivers anymore. Even if they're seeing limited work and volume, their efficiency is going to make up for that. So maybe I do need to change my outlook on these guys like AJ Brown and Deebo Samuel
Yeah,
going forward.
I've changed a bit on AJ Brown, to be honest, and it just comes down to like I just don't see that offense being able to do what it did again, right? Like just being able to grind out the clock and throw like 15, 20 times a game. Like that's just so rare. And like things have to go so well for them. Like they literally scored on every single drive. And look, Derrick Henry is great. He's a beast, right? But at the end of the day, like I think that offense is going to pass more than people think. And because of that, I think AJ Brown's obviously the number one there. I don't think he's going to be nearly as efficient as he was this year, but I think he's going to get a lot more volume to make up for it.
Move on to the next question. We have Saucy Peen. He asks, is simply being young overrated? I think in Dynasty, it's very important that you consider age, but I also think a lot of people don't really know the ages of many players, which is why I'll tweet out like once a week just some random thing about a player not being as old as we think. Like Michael Thomas is a year younger than Robert Woods. If you were to ask like 100 people at the NFL draft just walking on the street how old Michael Thomas was and how old Robert Woods was, I bet they say 25 and then like 34. Like people don't really look into like it's one of the
Yeah.
easiest things to search and like research, but not many people really know the age of players and they weigh their rankings because of ages without really knowing the disparity between two different players.
Yeah, I think flip it the other way and say like are age older veterans undervalued? And I'd say almost certainly they're undervalued. But the key is like there's a difference, like there's difference between how I draft versus how I trade, right? Because in the draft, I'm not sure yet if I'm competing, punting, what I'm doing. So I like to be flexible. So at the top of my draft, I'm gonna go for younger guys, right? But when I've already established myself, right, and I know I'm a competitive team or I know I'm a rebuilding team, if I'm a competitive team, I'm always going for veterans. Like I just traded for Robert Woods in the Flay of the Public, and I think it was a good deal for both sides. But like those types of transactions are always beneficial, where like you have a team that's rebuilding and a team that's going for it. You can always get veterans production for like a decent price because to the rebuilding team, they're just not worth as much, right? Because they're not trying to compete. All those points do is make them get a higher pick, which is bad at the end of the day. For a competing team, it's good. So I think it's very different how you approach things, whether you're in a draft, you want to maintain flexibility. That's why you choose youth at the top of the draft. But if someone falls far enough, like if you see Julio fall in the 6th round, I mean, just take them, right? It's really that easy. But when you're trading for them, once you're in a league for like you're in your 2nd year and your 3rd year, always try and target those veterans, man, because like when I'm on the clock on rookie drafts, especially in the tail end of the first, I will always happily give up one of my rookie picks to get like a proven veteran, even if they're older, because to buy on that age discount.
Yeah, it's so easy to acquire these older guys because not to rag on Scott again, but there was a time when I was trying to trade him Mike Evans, and I believe he's 26 years old. He's like, "Oh, I don't like to buy guys that are heading into the latter part of their career." But when you think about it, right, these guys are 26. If you sold Julio Jones at 26 years old, you missed out on what, like 5 wide receiver 1
Yeah.
seasons? And I'm not comparing those two guys talent-wise because obviously Julio Jones is one of the best receivers of all time. But a guy like Mike Evans, or even like you said, a Robert Woods, what is he, 28? He's not like this big athletic freak
Yeah.
that relies on his speed or anything to win in whatever coverage he's facing. He's just a good receiver. I could easily see him being a fringe wide receiver 1 for the next 2 years and then be very
Yeah.
valuable thereafter, just being like a wide receiver 2. So as Mike said, when you are in the draft, I think it's important to hit on the youth because it gives you the flexibility to either rebuild or trade those assets for younger guys if you end up having an older core like I did in the NYC league where I ended up in like the 7th round,
Yeah.
the whole script flipped on me. That's a tongue twister, and I completely messed it up. But yeah, that's a very good strategy to go into. And people just they don't like seeing the age of like 27 or 28 by anybody's name, even wide receivers, which we know have a longer shelf life than most running backs. So that's a good arbitrage play is to just buy them because nobody really wants to have them when they're perceived to be old, even though their shelf life is still continuing to provide value.
That's just so true. I think like honestly, like Scott's a godly trader, I think, but he also takes it like to the way extreme where like he will literally fade, honestly, like start fading value and making like and going super heavy on youth, right? Like he did for was it what it do dynasty or something? Like there were some draft picks where it was like crazy, like how much he was fading like age, like as if like these guys were literally going to become lepers next year. So
Yeah, I think he went to
yeah.
J.K. Dobbins like late second, which I like J.K.
Yeah.
Dobbins, but that's kind of
Yeah, I mean that's not even like it was later on when he was like taking like super like young tight ends and just completely fading production. And like you gotta strike a balance, right? Like so, sometimes you punt year one. I do it too. So that's why I understand where Scott's coming from. But you gotta like find a balance. You can't take it to like the complete extreme where you just like totally fade vets because at the end of the day, in season, when guys are competing, you can still sell those guys. There's still a sell window that's existent. So don't take it to the crazy extremes where like you're literally fading almost guaranteed production that you can flip for future picks in season for like very unproven guys. I think you got to take a more balanced approach. That's what I try to do as well. So yeah, just make sure you strike a balance, man. Just be fucking water, like Bruce Lee says. Like you should live. Like I live by this in not just in life, but also in fantasy. Like be water. You have to be flexible and see what people are doing in the draft, and you have to pivot.
continuing on the trend of picking value. We have Big Spence asking, how do you know when to take value that has fallen to you? I had a draft today where I took Hill at 12 instead of a running back. I'll kick this over to you, Mike, at first because I realized for the other like 3 or 4 questions, I just kind of went on for 2 minutes without letting you speak.
Look, I think you have to like just understand who you're drafting with, right? I think, if you're in a BDG league, obviously they're going to follow more so along the lines of like what Noah and I or Nick say. So they're going to be very running back heavy. And even in other leagues, I've started seeing this now where like, I wrote the draft guide, obviously, and I wrote the Bible and I meant every word of it when I wrote it. But I think I'm seeing a trend now where like the elite wide receivers are following it a bit too far. Guys like Hill, I think should be going in the first round, or at least by the second round, and I'm seeing him fall to like the late second. So when these elite guys are falling, like we got Chris Godwin in the third,
Yeah,
right?
I think it was like
In the
mid or
BG.
late third.
Devontae Adams went one pick before us. So when guys like Adams and Hill and Godwin are falling into the third round, you just have to click the buy button. And I know I say fade wide receiver, but at the end of the day, like your goal should still be to draft good players and elite players, and you just don't let elite players fall that low. And as much as we think all these running backs are going to hit, especially the rookie ones, some of them are inevitably going to bust. And at the end of the day, like if you look at like year to year stability, like the wide receiver position does tend to be more stable. So I take value. It's different. Like in the first round, right? If someone falls like 5 or 6 spots, I think that's a lot of value, and I'll make a move and I'll trade up. Like someone like Deshaun Watson falls at the end of the first, I'll trade up to get him every single time. But once you get into later rounds, I start looking at like, okay, well, maybe if he's fallen like a full round. So it just depends on where you are in the drafts. Early on in the draft, it's all about like tier breaks, right? So I think that's how you deal with it. You got to talk about tier breaks.
Yeah, and I think the more drafts you're a part of, even mock drafts, which we'll touch on, I think, in tomorrow's video, the more experience you have, you'll start to understand where players are going around. And not to sound like all high and mighty, but you kind of just know when a player is a value, right? When you see a Robert Woods in the eighth or ninth round, or a Devontae Parker in that range, and even in the NYC league, I was in the seventh round building a young core, and I had Zach Ertz and Keenan Allen on the board, and I believe a full point PPR, and then or half point, whatever it was, and then tight end premium. And sure, Zach Ertz is a bit older, and sure, Keenan Allen is what 28. But when you get guys who are top 5 for Zach Ertz and top 12 at their position perennially, it's just hard to pass up, and you can't really. At that point, it's hard to justify passing on those guys. So I'd say when you get to the point where you can't really make a case for you to pass on them just because you like a younger guy's upside a little bit better, even though it's unknown, I think that's when you know that there's way too much value there. As for Hill at 12, I agree. I think he is very close to being like the wide receiver one in Dynasty because of his age and because of the quarterback he is tied to.
He is my
Uh,
wide receiver one.
he's your number one?
Yeah, he's my wide receiver one.
Oof, big moves, Mike. So I don't think that's like too much of a reach because there's obviously like guys like Nick Chubb and Joe Mixon you can rationalize ahead of him. But yeah, Tyreek Hill, wherever you can get him at and around the end of the first or mid second, early second, whatever it is, I think it's a good pick. So I definitely don't think you reached there if you're nervous that that was the case. Next up, we have DM9219. He asks, how do you decide which second year players are buy lows? Also, is the reason for the drop in this year's wide receiver production because teams are spreading the ball out more? I think touching on the first one for me, looking at like wide receivers, right? You can target a N'Keal Harry or Paris Campbell. I think what you want to do is target guys that their value dropped for reasons beyond them not being good or talented, right? Like N'Keal Harry last year, his value dropped because he was hurt the entire year, and obviously the quarterback switch definitely hurts. But you weren't picking N'Keal Harry at the 102, the 103 in your rookie drafts last year, thinking Tom Brady was going to be there for another 10 years. You knew a quarterback change was imminent. I don't know the word. And so I think he is a good buy because a lot of people are valuing him as like a mid to late second round rookie pick for this year. And I believe if he was in this class, he would easily be like a surefire first round pick. So I think he is a good guy to buy. Even like a JJ Arcega-Whiteside, obviously he didn't do much of anything despite a very shallow wide receiver core. You look at the fact that you can get him for like a third round rookie pick, like a late one, or even like a fourth, because people when they're on the clock just want whoever the hell is out there in the fourth round. So I think that's a good enough buy opportunity. Paris Campbell, I know you're lower on, and I'm a little bit lower on than most. But again, like he was injured most of his rookie year. He had a quarterback that we thought was me Andrew Luck. It didn't happen. Jacoby Brissett was there, and people were still high on Paris Campbell. Now they have a guy that likes to pepper the slot, so maybe he's somebody you want to throw a third round pick at and try to invest in. But that's typically what I like to go for when I'm buying second year players. It didn't really prove much in the rookie year because most of the time most rookie wide receivers don't do much in their rookie year, and I think we were kind of spoiled by the AJ Browns, the Debos, and the DKs this past season.
Yeah, I have a little bit different approach. Like Harry's just someone that I'm just gonna stand for till I die. So he's like completely rational and just for reason why I like him. And a lot of it has to do with his profile. A lot of it has to do with what I saw from him in college. Like that type of profile receiver just doesn't come along very often. So that's why I'm still on the Harry train. And like you said, there's a reason. There's reasons why he struggled, but part of it is also because he wasn't good last year. Like there's no hiding that he just wasn't very good at separating. He wasn't very good when he's on the field. And part of that is, Tom Brady doesn't trust the guy, right? Like they don't. That's not a good mesh. Like Tom Brady wants guys that know exactly where they need to be, where they want to be. N'Keal Harry's like a playmaker, where like a little bit of wild card, you just get him the ball in space. So I agree. I think he's a good buy low because of how cheap it is. I've been buying him a lot of places. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, I'm basically off of now just because like I just can't explain why he was so bad other than the fact that he's probably bad because he couldn't like do anything in an offense that had literally like had like Greg Ward, like the future like probably practice squad slash grocery baggers coming in and producing. So for wide receivers, look, I think I'm gonna fade the guys that like bust and fall like entirely on their face. I'm not really buying low on those guys anymore unless it's someone like Harry. So guys like Hakeem Butler, who I was never high on, even like Paris Campbell, like he was injured, I get it, but I was just never high on him to begin with. So I'm just like not going to invest in him. Isabella, another one who I was like actually pretty high on, who fell on his face. Like these types of guys, I'm just not buying them anymore. What I'm looking for is guys that like had some sort of production and some sort of efficiency, even though so you got to look past the counting stats, right? So an example of this would be Christian Kirk. So Christian Kirk, I was buying last year, and I'm still buying this year. If you looked at his stats from year one as a rookie, not very impressive at all, right? Like what is like 500 something yards, 600 something yards, and but if you dig into it, his efficiency on a yards per run basis is actually pretty good. And then if you think about the context of what the situation was, he was placed in a situation with Josh Rosen, who obviously was doomed to fail and just wasn't very good to begin with. But despite all of that, he was able to produce. And then this year again, the counting stats went up, but the efficiency dropped. And we look at why, like he had I believe it was a high ankle sprain or like
Yeah, I think he did
like an
have
ankle
a
injury. Yeah, an ankle injury. But now he's going into his second year with Kyler Murray. Had a new coach last year, second year with that coach, second year in the system. And then, gets DeAndre Hopkins alongside him, which I think is a good thing because I think Christian Kirk is gonna take that next leap as the second wide receiver. He's not really prototyped as an alpha wide receiver. So those are the types of guys I look for. Someone that had like momentum, especially late in the season. Going into next year that are not getting valued appropriately because people are very excited about rookies. So, it's going to be really hard to do this for next year because all the wide receivers really produce. Terry McLaurin, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, like all the hype is already there. So it's very hard to find that second year producer. I would say, one place you could look could be David Montgomery. I mean, I was never a big fan of his. I'm still not a really big fan of his because I think he has major holes in his game, but he's someone that has volume and actually put up a okay-ish season, and he's basically going off at like very discount prices. So I'm comfortable throwing a couple darts there. Not to say I'm all in, but I think those are the types of trends I look for.
Wow, Mike, you had me reeled in when you're talking about Christian Kirk, and then you brought up Dave Montgomery, and I was all out. But yeah, I like what you're saying there. Look at the efficiency stats. Even though Andy Isabella had that one like 88-yard touchdown, which definitely helped his yards per route run, because he probably ran like 3 routes, and that was one of them. So maybe don't look too in depth on him. But touching on the Arizona Cardinals wide receiver group, the second part of this question actually has to do with teams spreading the ball out more, and maybe that was the reason for the wide receiver production dipping last year. I was looking at the production last year, and I believe Nick brings up in a lot of videos, like if Kenny Golladay had his numbers from last year, the year prior, he would have been like the wide receiver 12 or something. I also think you have to look at how many guys were really injured last year that were perennial top 12 or, top 15 guys. Adam Thielen had a hamstring injury. Antonio Brown, we all know that guy kind of went crazy. He wasn't even in the league for most of the season. Amari Cooper had his inconsistencies. Juju Smith-Schuster was hurt. Big Ben was hurt. Yep. Mike Evans got hurt a few games. Brandon Cooks, his head almost fell off. Odell was on a new team, and T.Y. Hilton was hurt. So I don't think it's – obviously, as teams spread the ball out more, there is going to be less volume. And if you don't improve your efficiency, the points aren't going to be there. But I think there are enough good receivers in the NFL for it to bounce back from last year, where it was kind of an anomaly when you look at how many top-end wide receivers and how many quarterbacks really got injured, whether it be Stafford, Cam Newton, Big Ben. So that's where my head is at there. I don't think wide receivers are just like dead. The entire wide receiver group is a dying breed, but you should also go back to our previous point that, Mike brought up with J.J. Zacharyson, that these alpha receivers may not really be a thing in the very near future. Next up, we have B. Gendza. I cannot pronounce any of these names. He asks, out of the top 5 running backs off the board in rookie drafts, so I assume it's Jonathan Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, who's most likely to bust and be worthless a year or two down the road? Mike, I know you love Jonathan Taylor. I know you've kind of turned on J.K. Dobbins to love him a little bit more. So who do you think is going to bust, if any of them?
Man, that's a tough question. I mean, I said this, even back way before the draft. If I were to pick one that's most likely to bust, it would be Cam Akers. And even though I love Cam Akers, the reason is just because like he's just so raw, right? He's so raw, and that's like he's so raw. He's not a great elite processor, I guess, at the line. At least from what I saw, he definitely makes mistakes there, but he also has like one of the highest ceilings of the class, and that's like I think that's a fair take, right? Because it's all about risk reward trade off, right? Like, what are you chasing? If you're chasing the ceiling, like I think Cam Akers has it, and he has it as good as any of them in this draft. But he also has the highest risk of them all. So as a Cam Akers stan, like as a Cam Akers truthers through and through, like I've been here standing for this man for a long time. I can still recognize his flaws. And, contrary to popular belief, people think we just push Cam Akers, religiously. Like that is one of the risks. So if I were to pick one in terms of like the most likely to bust, it would be Cam Akers. But I still really, really like him as a prospect.
Yeah, I narrowed it down to him and DeAndre Swift. I just think the other guys, it's tough for them to ever really lose relevance in these next 2 years, at least in fantasy football, because you have Jonathan Taylor running behind that offensive line. Like that guy, Jonathan Williams, is a fucking RB1 2 weeks in a row. Whoever is tied to Patrick Mahomes is going to be good. Like people will still be drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the second round of redraft leagues, as they did with Damian Williams, even if the guy has no hamstrings and he's not good. J.K. Dobbins with Lamar Jackson is going to be hard to pass up. So I was between Swift and Akers. I let my love for Cam Akers blind me. I'm just going DeAndre Swift because, when's the last time we've seen a Lions running back be good? Not that I'm afraid he's the next Amir Abdullah or the next Kerryon Johnson, because I do think he's probably the most pro-ready running back of all these guys because he can really do it all, and he's in a situation where he's probably going to earn the starting job right away. But I just worry about the quarterback longevity there. Obviously, Matt Stafford has played through injuries in the past, but there's some concern with his back there. Their offensive line, I believe they lost 2 offensive linemen. They signed a new guy, but the continuity isn't quite there. They have Kerryon Johnson, and I'm not sure that they're going to want to go with a bell cow. So I don't think in terms of losing value completely over these next 2 years, I don't think it's going to happen because people still want to buy youth at the running back position. People are still drafting Tariq Cohen out there for whatever the fucking reason that is. So I don't think any of these guys are bad investments because they probably will maintain their value for at least one full season. But if I were to lean on one guy to be a quote unquote bust, I'd probably have to say DeAndre Swift. He's going to be AJ Brown. He's going to prove me wrong with that landing spot. So I'm just not going to talk about him anymore because I don't want to be completely wrong. Next up, we have Kenny WS. He asks, how much does a full point tight end premium actually increase the value of tight ends? Mike, you've touched on this before. I believe you
Yeah.
said the top guys are just fucking elite.
Yeah, we can probably combine the next question as well. The next question is from the Doc is back. He says, where should top tight ends be falling in tight end premium leagues, half PPR, super flex, where tight ends score 1 point? So one concept that people need to understand is you need to think about it in terms of the multiplier, right? So if you're in a half PPR and a tight end gets one full point PPR, that's more valuable than a tight end getting 1.5 PPR and a full point premium. And it's more equivalent to a full PPR where a tight end gets 2 PPR. So you got to think about it that way in terms of multiplier, because that's what like creates the gap between the elite guys and the non-elite guys. So I've said this before and I say it again, like elite guys should be valued appropriately. So Kittle should be a first rounder. And I think Andrews, I have Andrews ahead of Kittle just because of the age, even though not ahead of Kittle, sorry, ahead of Kelsey, even though Kelsey will probably outscore him this year. I just think the youth there is too much to pass up. Like it's like getting Kelsey like at the beginning of Kelsey's hype. In terms of his age. So I think Andrew should be going in the second round. And then beyond that, I think this year's, a little bit unique, right? Because before I would have said like, look, after that, you just fade everyone. And then you wait till the late rounds. And that's kind of what people are doing. So you don't have to draft them early yet because based on BDG ADP, I think a lot of these tight ends are still a little bit undervalued. Guys like Waller, guys like Ertz, guys like, what do you
Tyler
call it?
Higbee. Evan
Yeah,
Ingram is still pretty undervalued.
Evan Ingram as well. Like they're falling into the late single digit round. So I think in tight end premium formats, you can kind of click those guys before you get your like wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, because I think at the end of the day they're going to score a lot better. But I do think that from the BDG ADP that we saw, I think that elite tight ends are undervalued. And we kind of brought up Kittle as if someone who's undervalued, even though he's tight end 1, but he's going in like the late second round. So I think if you're getting him in the mid second, like that's great value. If you're getting him in the late second, I think that's a steal because the tight end longevity is a lot longer than running backs and even wide receivers. But more importantly, the scoring advantage that Kittle provides over the next like high scoring tight ends is actually pretty massive.
Yeah, and if we're talking about a full point tight end premium where like a wide receiver gets half a point and a tight end gets 1.5, they get an extra on top of that. I mean, a guy like George Kittle should be, a top 5-6 pick. You look at what he did last year. If he got that additional full point on top of a half PPR, and you compare it to Michael Thomas, he would have averaged more fantasy points per game. Travis Kelce would have also outscored Michael Thomas last year in what was a very historic receiving season for Michael Thomas. So in that type of setting, those elite tight ends, like Mark Andrews should be an early second round pick there, even though he's not the biggest reception type of guy. But,
Yeah.
the scarcity at the position is much more serious and much more drastic than even quarterbacks in a super flex league. So you have to value them accordingly. And on top of that, even in, the multiplier where it's like just 2 times, right? If it's half PPR, the tight end gets an extra half. So they get 1 full point PPR. I think a good play is to target some older guys a little bit later, whereas instead of picking like a wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 on their own team, not even on your roster, you should go with a guy like a Jared Cook, right? There aren't many like old guys that I'm fans of this year aside from Jared Cook, but like last year, somebody like a Greg Olsen, a Delaney Walker, Jason Witten, 2 of those 3 gave you some pretty good weeks last season, and you're getting them in rounds where you're picking players that will probably be cut for you, before the season even starts. So I think in tight end premium leagues, picking older guys that will give you immediate production but might not have the longevity that other players you perceive to have in that range they'll provide you good flex plays throughout the season. If you have a deep roster, need somebody to throw out there like Jared Cook this upcoming season will probably make your starting roster almost every single week just because he's on the Saints and he's a main target of Drew Brees.
Yeah, and we'll fold another question into here. D Patel 35 asks, when doing the rebuild first year strategy and startup, how beneficial is it to secure a young tight end, mainly either Kittle or Andrews? I think, we talked about tight end premium. I think in non-tight end premium, I find tight ends to be undervalued. And sorry, not all tight ends, but the elite ones, because Like when I'm starting a punt year one, like rebuild, productive struggle, whatever you want to call it, I usually want to secure the tight end position because that's like one hole where you can kind of plug and then just ride. Similar to quarterback, you can ride them for a long time, uh, except like different from quarterback. There's only like 5 or 6 of them, right? There's only really 5 or 6 of them in any given year. And in some years, only 2 or 3 of them in any given year that you really feel comfortable starting like every single weekend. So having that like roster slot, like basically locked and loaded, it creates a lot of like other tangential benefits which may not be realized in points, but like roster slots, like roster cloggers, like otherwise you're literally like holding like 4 or 5 tight ends and just cycling them through and through to try and like piece together a tight end one season. So I think that in non tight end premium, even like guys like Kittle and Andrews are great pieces to build around over like a young wide receiver.
Yeah, it's such a scarce position. Like every single year, there's going to be 1 to 2 to 3 quarterbacks coming into the league that are going to have a starting job. They're picked early in rookie drafts for tight ends, right? This past year, the earliest one you're probably taking is Adam Troutman or Cole Kmet in like the late third round. The year prior, even like a TJ Hawkinson or a Noah Fant, they were seen as almost generational talents. I know that word is thrown around a ton, but they were seen as that coming out of Iowa. And even now, right, they're being picked around the like late single digit rounds because people are nervous because they didn't produce right away. Getting a tight end that is both young and has been productive at a young age is a huge advantage because in dynasty leagues, you're not able to stream off the waiver wire. Most leagues have like 15 to 20 bench spots. And even the worst tight ends in the world, like a Foster Moreau, who's going to do you no good, is locked up on somebody's taxi squad or on their bench. So it's very hard to get reliable tight end production in your lineup if you don't have one of these guys. Yeah. And just the scarcity of the position, the lack of elite tight ends coming to the league year after year. I believe 2021 has a few good prospects. I don't really know too well. I believe it's that guy Pitts is pretty good.
Kyle
but
Pitts.
Yeah, but even then, like if he doesn't produce year one,
That's
without
2022, by the way, not 2021.
2022.
Oh, wait, no,
you go
no,
again.
no, 2020. Yeah, 2021. Sorry, yeah, 2021.
Either way, he's not going to produce till 2022, so
Yeah,
it doesn't
exactly.
really matter. The tight end position is so scarce. I think you got to, if you have the opportunity to get a Kittle or Andrews, definitely draft them. But if you are most likely, if you are rebuilding from the startup draft, you probably traded like picks in rounds 1 through 3 or 4, so they probably won't be available to you.
You do not want to be in a position where you're relying on rookie drafts to fill the tight end position. That is not a pretty sight to be in. Like, think about all the people that overdrafted Gesicki, trash, right? And then who were the best ones to come out of the class? Like Mark Andrews, right? Like, and Mark Andrews, like at this point, to me, Mark Andrews is a like no miss like player. So I'm totally comfortable paying the premium for Andrews because in my eyes, it's like buying Kittle before Kittle was Kittle. It's like buying Kelsey before Kelsey was Kelsey. And like the other thing is like, I've said this many times, but like you just understand like the simple economics of scarcity, right? Like if you have 2 to 3 really good tight ends that are startable and another young tight end as well, like a lot of my rosters, I have like Andrews plus like Higbee plus like a young guy like Fant or like Hawkinson, right? And the reason why I have them there is because like if I can lock up 2, 3 of like a possible 8 starters in a league of 12 people, who are they going to come to when they need to trade for tight ends? There's only one person, right? Because it's like quarterbacks and superflex. You can only trade one away if you have one. And if most people don't have 2 tight ends because there aren't that many good starting tight ends to have, so that's a really, really easy position to create scarcity.
Yeah, and in the startup draft, it's like it's the worst feeling when you pick a tight end. You're like, man, that was the unsexiest pick of all time. But then week 4, when somebody's trotting out Jason Witten, who's playing second fiddle to Darren Waller, they're going to come crawling to your doorstep. You got to throw your backup tight end out there and get a good haul in return, especially in tight end premium leagues, because people view tight ends at such a lower value than quarterbacks in super flex leagues, even if it's a tight end premium league, which I personally don't understand because a lot of the time, even like a Hunter Henry is outscoring some of your wide receivers on a week-to-week basis. So they carry a ton of value, even if it's just like a half point on top of a half point for normal running back and wide receiver receptions. So we also have Codeine asking how we feel about Dallas Goedert heading into the season healthy, with a healthy Zach Ertz, Deshaun Jackson, and Jalen Reagor. I was about to say he probably isn't heading into the season healthy after he took that hit in the bar. I don't know what the hell happened there, but that was a scary sight.
You got knocked the fuck out, man.
Yeah, dude, that was crazy. He just like pushed the guy back and he was just out cold in a matter of a second.
Yeah.
But The thing about or Dallas Goedert to me is I was never buying him or drafting him expecting 2020 to be his year to be an elite tight end one. He was a tight end one last year, but anything after like tight end seven is a fraud, so I don't really care. But I think it doesn't really matter if Jackson is healthy, if Jalen Reagor is added to this offense and Zach Ertz is still there. He carved out a role last year, and I think the reason why you're buying him is for him to replace Zach Ertz. And sure, they added Jalen Reagor, who is probably going to be that alpha receiver in that offense. And Dallas Goedert will probably never have the ceiling as Zach Ertz had. But you look at the system he's in with Doug Peterson, who came from the Andy Reid coaching tree, who had a young Travis Kelce up and coming in that offense. And they started to pepper him with targets despite other weapons being around there. I think after Zach Ertz is gone, Dallas Goedert is going to be a perfectly fine player for you, probably like a top 5 or 6 tight end in Dynasty because he's a little bit older. But as we've touched on, like the tight end shelf life is a lot older than we think. Like fucking Jason Witten was top 12 last year, being a year removed from football, not looking good at all. I think he's somebody that I'm still buying. I'm not worried that they added more weapons. I think it helps balance out that offense because last year it was abysmal watching them try to drop back and throw.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, there aren't many like tight end handcuffs, but Dallas Goedert is one. If Ertz goes down, I think he's an immediate top 5 like producing tight end. But at the same time, like you should not be overpaying for handcuffs, right? I mean, he's definitely Ertz is going to be there for a couple of years, I think, to be honest. And there's been talk in the offseason about Ertz getting extended from some of the, I guess, the Eagles reporters. We have yet to see that happen, but if that happens, then like Dallas Goedert's value like really plummets even more. So I'd be careful like investing like high amounts in Goddard. Like, look, I love the talent. He's a great player, been pretty efficient. But I think you got to be comfortable like sitting on him for like 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3 years before he really, really steps up and takes that elite status. And I think at his prices right now, it's a little bit tough. Sometimes you can get him for cheap, but every other league I'm in, like there's that like Dallas Goedert tight end one truther that just takes him like ahead of like Hawkinson and all these guys who actually have a real shot of being a starting tight end.
Yeah, and that kind of transitions. I'll try to transition it to our man Dylan Joy's question where he says, what's your preferred dynasty approach? The wide receivers provide longevity, but the heavy hitting RBs are a necessity for winning championships. It can be difficult to get both. So you can get like a Dallas Goedert, the 8th or 9th round. And I think next week we're going to be touching on like the best strategy to go into a draft, basically Mike's Bible, but in video form. But we're not going to go as in depth because as people say, the book is always better than the movie, and Mike put a lot of hard work into the Bible. So I think it's both of our strategies to, if you're in the position to do so, grab those running backs early because spending a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick on a Melvin Gordon, a Todd Gurley, a Leonard Fournette, I mean, it doesn't give you much longevity and it gives you like middling RB2 production for a year or two. I think if you are at the back end of the first round and you can get like a Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb stack and get those Allen Robinsons, those DJ Charks, those Calvin Ridleys in the mid rounds, and in between those, pair it with like a Carson Wentz in the 3rd, a Matt Stafford in the 6th or 7th. I think that gives you a good enough opportunity to not only be a win now team, but also have longevity because most of those guys that I named, aside from like Matt Stafford, are pretty young and they have 3 to 5 year windows. The running backs are probably 3 to 5 year windows. Those wide receivers probably have like 5 to 10 years of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type of production, which I'll take any day of the week in like the 6th or 7th round.
Yeah, I think I hate when people make like the longevity argument because like one, it's not even that true. Like people make it sound like wide receivers last twice as long as running backs when in reality they don't because it takes them like 2 to 3 years to like develop and like actually like come full steam and ramp up. Whereas like running backs kind of hit the ground running, so you kind of already have a lead, and then also like running back values accrue more. So look, like longevity is like to me, it's like is like playing not to lose, right? Like I always play to win, and because of that, like I'll have like a bigger variance in terms of like how my teams do, and I'll either smash or like I'll just go into a rebuild. And I think that's the way to play. Like otherwise you like kind of get stuck in the middle, and the middle ground is like not really where you want to be. Like the way I think about it is like I'm not worried about longevity because I would have cycled my roster like 2 to 3 times by the time this guy's career over. Like I don't draft someone being like, oh yeah, fuck yeah, like I'm gonna have that guy for 12 years. Like I don't care. Like I'm gonna just
Dude,
play the market and see value accrue over time.
in the Filet the Public League, Yannick and I share a team, and we were talking about a player like, oh, you wanted Devontae Adams here? I'm like, he's 27. I don't know. We're kind of going young. He's like, who the fuck cares? He's not gonna be on our roster in week 3. Like,
Yeah,
Dynasty
exactly.
makes so many trades. Like, I get what you're saying. The longevity argument isn't always the best argument because most of the time the team you draft in your startup is probably going to be all gone before the season even begins.
Yeah, I just think like, yeah, I'm a volume trader, and I'm a pretty big trade addict, and I like to time and sell, time my sells and buys, and trade a lot just based on market value and perception of value, to try and accumulate wealth and accumulate value onto my team. So like longevity doesn't really come into play for me when we're talking about like position versus position. When we're talking about like age, like it comes into play for me because I want guys that have a perceived value of longer runway because it attributes their value, and I want to buy increasing assets. I don't want to buy declining assets. But when people make the argument like, oh, like QBs have more longevity, like, oh, wide receivers have more longevity, like, who gives a fuck, man? You're trying to win like right now. You're trying to win the next 2 years. Like that. I think, in my opinion, like, look, just don't be a coward when you play dynasty, right? Like, take risks, and like usually the championship teams are the one that take risks. Don't take unnecessary risks. Like, don't be an idiot, but you got to take risks to win. And I think you got to swing on running backs to actually win championships.
Moving over to our last question by Caught Capin. He asks, is the 2021 draft class as good as the 2020 class? Mike, I know you're in a few Devy leagues, so I'll let you hit on this, but my initial reaction is I think the 2021 class is almost as good at, or better at every position except maybe the elite running backs.
I think you're right on there. The running backs doesn't really sync up with 2020. And I think overall the class might not be as deep, because if you look at this class, when you're getting guys like KJ Hamler in like the 4th round and 3rd round, that's not going to happen every year. Guys with 2nd round draft capital and like really great profiles. So I think this class is very deep. And if you look at it from a NFL draft capital invested, it was probably one of the best classes ever, just based on how many people went like by day 2. Like the amount of running backs and wide receivers that went in round 1, round 2 was actually pretty insane. So from that perspective, I'd say it's not as good. But if you look at the top of the wide receiver class, I think the top of the wide receiver class for 2021 is a lot better than 2020, even after losing Justin Ross. And I think the quarterbacks is better by a lot. I think just with guys like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence leading the way. Then you got like Trey Lance coming up as well. So I think those 2 position groups are better. Tight end is obviously better because 2020 was just absolutely ass. And you got
When
like
Cole
Kyle
Kmet is
Pitts.
seen as the best tight end, it's much worse.
Yeah. When Cole Kmet's is seen as a consensus tight end, you know there's something wrong. But you got Kyle Pitts, you got Pat Fryermuth, you got Brevin Jordan. So 3 pretty good tight end prospects. So I think across the board, like aside from running backs, you can say the 2021 class is more top heavy and has more talent at the top. But overall, as a class, I don't think it'll be as deep as the 2020. And then especially with like COVID and all these like seasons and games being lost, like you have no idea how these players are going to develop.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Can like Chuba Hubbard still come out this year with that supplemental
No,
draft? Oh, he
no,
can't.
you can't, because it has to be like a really rare exception. It can't just be like, oh, like I changed my mind and I want to go in the NFL.
That's crazy because I know he's having like beef with Mike Gundy, and
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was eligible this past year, so I was wondering if he could come out. But yeah,
yeah.
as you said, the running back class definitely isn't as deep. They do have some pretty good guys at the top, whether it be Hubbard, Najee Harris, and Travis Etienne. Obviously, landing spot has a ton to do with it, like we saw this year. Like Clyde Edwards-Helaire was our consensus RB5, and then he moved up to our RB1 and RB2 because he landed on the Chiefs. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think Mike hit the nail perfectly on the head. The quarterbacks there, we've heard about Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields for the past 5 years, ever since they were in high school, just throwing dimes. The wide receivers, the top of the class, like Chase, Rondale Moore, what's his name, Rashad Bateman.
Yep.
Like they have so many guys that I know, like analytically, I've seen on Twitter. They're like LSRL and shit like that is ridiculous. It's better than like Juju Smith-Schuster and stuff like that. Who I guess isn't somebody who you should compare most elite receivers to after this past season that he put up. But it looks to be a very good class. The tight ends this past year was a shit show other than our boy Adam Troutman, so it can't get much worse. This isn't to say just go out there and fucking acquire every single 2021 pick and trade away guys that are proven talents for them, but I think at this point they're pretty cheap, and they're cheap enough for you to, at least in the startup draft, move like a 7th, 8th round pick for a 2021 first. Because
Yep.
even if it is a mid to a late 2021 first, you're getting one of these guys like a Rondell Moore, or maybe even a Jamar Chase. So I think that's a good investment to make.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, 2021 and even 2022. Like I'm already past 2021 now. I'm looking at 2022, which is why in the BBB listener league, me and Noah tried to collect all the 2022 picks we had. And in another like Devy's, not a Devy, in another 14 team startup league, I think I left the startup draft with like like 8 first round picks between 2021 and 2022.
That's
I think
crazy.
2022 class is going to be pretty lit as well. So always buy on the cheap, and those assets are guaranteed to increase in value, like guaranteed, like U.S. government treasury bill. Maybe not anymore because Donald Trump's freaking printing money like nobody's business. But before COVID and before all this stuff, U.S. treasury bill is probably one of the safest investments ever, guaranteed to go up in value. That's how you should view like future rookie picks. So they're guaranteed to increase in value, except the return on them will be much better than a treasury bill.
Yeah, I wish I knew a little bit more about treasury bills and shit like that, or else I wouldn't be speaking to this type of mic. But I think that's all we got for you guys today. If you guys like the style of video and you like the Q&As, keep dropping them in the Discord, which you can join through Patreon now. It has been closed off, which, I mean, it's been open for like 5 months at this point. If you didn't join before, you probably didn't want to join. And if you're upset about not joining, hopefully you're not a new viewer. I hope I'm not like being an asshole right now, but you can join through Patreon. You can drop questions in that channel. I believe it's BBB Q&A. And bi-weekly, Mike and I will hop on, probably answer like 4 to 5 questions in a shorter form video that will be exclusive to the Bunkbed Breakdowns YouTube channel. It'll be linked down below, or you can just type in Bunkbed Breakdowns and click the one with the beautiful cover art, not the guy like playing his banjo in the bottom of a bunk. That is definitely not us, although I kind of wish it was me. But all right, before we go, we are doing a draft guide giveaway. Only one because we're not that wealthy. If you rate us 5 stars and you leave a review in the iTunes store, I don't know how to check like Google Play, so it has to be the iTunes store. I'm sorry for you Android users. Next week, we will announce the winner. We will give away the season-long / dynasty rookie draft guide. So if you want to be entered into the competition, into the sweepstakes, leave a review, screenshot it, send it to us on Twitter. We'll see it anyways, even if you don't do that, but a little bit more engagement would never hurt. So if you want to have the chance to win a draft guide, read Mike's Bible and catch up on what next week's video will be about before you guys get to see it, leave a review. Hopefully not 1 star, hopefully 5 star if you guys enjoy. But I think that's all we got for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoy the content. And coming up tomorrow, we have the narrative, a separate video from now on to get more content on the channel. So see you guys later. Have a good one.
Peace.